the humble roots of a fighter, before he became the 46th President of the United States. Joe Biden was just a kid from Scranton, Pennsylvania, a small industrial town where steel, smoke, and sweat built lives. Born in 1942 to a working-class Irish Catholic family, young Joe didn't have the luxury of power or privilege. What he had was grit and a stutter that made him the target of constant mockery. He would often stand in front of a mirror late at night, reciting poetry, practicing every word, every syllable, until his speech became his strength instead of his weakness. That stubborn will to overcome became the foundation of his life, a life that would take him from school hallways to the halls of power. His father, Joseph Biden Sr., taught him early, "Champ, the measure of a man is not how often he gets knocked down, but how quickly he gets up." Those words would echo through Joe's toughest years as the Bidens moved to Delaware in search of better opportunities. Joe started finding his voice, literally and politically. In high school, he was no genius, no golden boy, but he had something people noticed instantly: heart. He stood up for others, made people laugh, and built connections the way only a genuine soul can. At the University of Delaware, Biden studied history and political science, not because it promised fame, but because he believed understanding people and their past was key to changing their future. He dreamed of serving, of making America fairer for families like his. Then came law school, and soon after, local politics. But behind that growing ambition was a quiet fire, the desire to prove that an ordinary man could rise through extraordinary struggle. By his late 20s, Joe Biden was already making waves in Delaware politics. Young, passionate, and honest, a rare combination in a world filled with empty suits. Few believed he could take on the establishment. Fewer believed he could win. But Joe Biden wasn't playing for comfort. He was playing for purpose. He was about to face the first of many battles, the kind that would test not just his career, but his faith, his family, and his heart. The journey from Scranton to the Senate had begun, but destiny was only warming up. The youngest senator and the unthinkable tragedy. It was 1972. America was divided by the Vietnam War, and the political air was thick with disillusionment. Amidst this chaos, a 29-year-old Joe Biden, energetic, idealistic, and relatively unknown, decided to challenge all odds and run for the U.S. Senate from Delaware. He was told, "You're too young, too inexperienced, and you don't stand a chance." But Biden didn't listen. He went door to door, shook hands, smiled wide, and spoke straight from the heart. His campaign was run on faith, family, and the promise of change. Against all predictions, he won, becoming one of the youngest senators in American history. But fate, as it often does, had a cruel twist waiting. Just weeks after his victory, while the celebrations were still echoing, tragedy struck. Joe's wife, Nelia, and their baby daughter, Naomi, were killed in a horrific car accident. His two young sons, Bo and Hunter, were critically injured. One moment he was a rising star in politics. The next, he was a broken father standing in a hospital corridor, staring at the unthinkable. The victory he had fought for meant nothing. He even thought about quitting politics forever. But it was his family, his wounded sons, lying in hospital beds, who gave him a reason to live. He took his Senate oath right there in the hospital, beside their beds. Every day, he would commute from Wilmington to Washington by train, just to tuck them in at night. That train ride became a symbol of who Joe Biden was. A man who refused to let ambition replace love, who believed that power means nothing without purpose. He learned to smile again, not because the pain faded, but because he chose to keep going. Colleagues saw a man who had stared into grief and come back stronger. He turned his personal loss into a lifelong mission to protect families, to heal hearts, to serve with empathy. That tragedy didn't destroy Joe Biden. It redefined him. From that moment on, he wasn't just a politician. He was a survivor and a father who carried both his dreams and his scars into every battle that followed. The senator who fought for the common man. Joe Biden entered the U.S. Senate not as a polished statesman, but as a man shaped by struggle. He knew what it meant to worry about bills, to face loss, to live paycheck to paycheck. That's why, unlike many in Washington, he spoke the language of the people, not the politicians. In the Senate, Biden quickly built a reputation as the voice of the working class. He wasn't afraid to cross party lines or challenge the elite. His style was raw, emotional, and deeply personal. He listened, really listened, to factory workers, single parents, and veterans. Every law he supported, every policy he fought for, came from stories he'd heard on those late-night train rides between Wilmington and Washington. He became known for his work on justice, foreign policy, and civil rights. But more than that, he was respected for his empathy. When someone lost a loved one, Biden didn't send a form letter. He showed up. He believed politics was not about power, but about people. Still, the journey wasn't smooth. He made mistakes, took hits, and faced criticism for his stances. Yet through it all, one thing never changed: his authenticity. In a city full of performance, Joe Biden stayed real. His Senate colleagues often said, "Joe feels things deeper than most," and they were right. That emotional depth became both his strength and his armor. When America's middle class suffered, he spoke with their pain in his voice. When racial injustice erupted, he called for understanding instead of division. Through the 1980s and 1990s, Biden grew into one of the Senate's most experienced and influential figures. He chaired the Judiciary and Foreign Relations Committees, tackling some of the toughest issues of his time. But even as his political power grew, his identity remained the same: Joe from Scranton, the man who took the train home every night. He wasn't chasing titles, he was chasing trust. For over 3 decades, Joe Biden became a symbol of resilience, a public servant who didn't just talk about America's struggles, but lived through them. Yet deep inside, he knew his journey wasn't done. There was a larger destiny waiting, one that would test everything he had learned and everything he believed in: dreams, defeats, and the road to the White House. By the late 1980s, Joe Biden's name had become familiar in American politics. He had the charm, the empathy, and the experience that many believed could take him all the way to the White House. In 1987, he decided to chase that dream, to run for President of the United States. It was bold, it was ambitious, and it was deeply personal. But fate wasn't ready to hand him victory yet. His first presidential campaign collapsed almost as quickly as it began. Accusations of plagiarism and exhaustion from overwork forced him to drop out. For Biden, it wasn't just a political loss. It was a personal heartbreak. He had dreamed big, but the fall was brutal. And then, life struck again. In 1988, he suffered to brain aneurysms that nearly killed him. The man who had fought through so much now faced his own mortality. He spent months in recovery, wondering if his public life was over. But Joe Biden wasn't built to surrender. Each setback only carved his resolve deeper. He returned to the Senate, quieter but wiser. The defeats had humbled him, yet also refined him. He began to see leadership not as a climb to the top, but as a service to the bottom, to those who had no voice. Years passed. He became one of the Senate's most respected voices on foreign policy and domestic issues. Still, the dream of the presidency never truly died in him. In 2008, that dream took a new turn when a young senator from Illinois, Barack Obama, called him. Obama wanted Biden to be his running mate. It wasn't the top spot, but it was a calling that matched Biden's heart to serve, not to shine. Together, they built a historic ticket, the first African-American presidential candidate, and a seasoned senator known for his humanity. Their partnership was more than politics. It was a balance of hope and experience, idealism and empathy. When they won, Biden didn't see it as his redemption, but as another chance to make a difference. From presidential failure to the vice presidency of the United States, Joe Biden's story was no longer about rising fast. It was about rising again, the loyal vice president and the power of empathy. When Joe Biden took office as vice president in 2009, he wasn't a man chasing glory. He was a man on a mission to heal a nation in crisis. America was facing the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression. Millions had lost their homes, their jobs, and their hope. Barack Obama needed a partner he could trust, not just politically, but personally. And Joe Biden became that partner. Behind the scenes, Biden was the steady hand, the counselor, and often the voice of reason in tense moments. He didn't crave the spotlight. He used his experience to guide decisions quietly but powerfully. Obama once said, "When Joe speaks, people listen not because he's loud, but because he cares." Biden oversaw the massive Recovery Act that helped rebuild the economy, saving millions of jobs and stabilizing families. He became the administration's bridge to Congress, a negotiator who could sit across from political rivals and still find common ground. Years of Senate service had taught him one thing: you can't fix what you hate. You fix what you understand. But beyond policy and politics, Joe Biden's greatest influence came from his humanity. He visited troops in Iraq and Afghanistan, comforted families who lost loved ones, and connected with everyday Americans in ways few politicians could. When a mother cried about losing her son to war, Biden didn't just offer sympathy. He shared his own loss. His tears were real, his hugs genuine. For him, empathy wasn't strategy, it was survival. The Obama-Biden partnership blossomed into a genuine friendship. Obama trusted Biden not as a subordinate, but as a brother in arms. Together, they led with compassion and conviction, reminding America that decency still mattered. By the end of Obama's second term, Joe Biden's popularity was at its peak. People saw him as the heart of the administration, the man who spoke for those who couldn't speak for themselves. Yet, just as his legacy seemed complete, life dealt another cruel blow. His eldest son, Beau Biden, a decorated soldier and a rising political star, was diagnosed with brain cancer. And once again, Joe Biden's strength would be tested, not by politics, but by pain. The loss that changed everything. In 2015, the Biden family faced the kind of heartbreak that no parent should ever endure. Beau Biden, Joe's eldest son, a war veteran, Attorney General of Delaware, and the pride of his father's heart, was diagnosed with an aggressive form of brain cancer. For Joe, it felt like history repeating itself. Another cruel test of faith. Beau wasn't just Joe's son. He was his mirror, disciplined, compassionate, and full of integrity. Joe often said, "Beau was me without the mistakes." Watching him fade day by day tore him apart. Despite all the power, all the connections, Joe Biden could do nothing but pray, hope, and hold his son's hand. In May 2015, Beau Biden passed away at just 46 years old. The world saw a vice president mourn, but inside, a father was shattered. The man who had already buried his wife and daughter now had to bury his firstborn. For months, Joe disappeared from the political spotlight. The world expected him to run for president in 2016, and many believed he could win. But his heart wasn't ready. Standing in the Rose Garden beside President Obama, Biden announced he would not run. His voice trembled as he said, "My family needs me. They always have. They always will." That moment defined Joe Biden more than any election could. It showed a man who chose family over ambition, compassion over power. He devoted himself to honoring Beau's memory, launching initiatives for cancer research, and connecting with families facing loss. The pain was deep, but so was the purpose it left behind. Biden wrote his memoir, Promise Me, Dad, recounting the year of Beau's illness, a raw, emotional journey through grief, love, and resilience. The title came from Beau's final words to his father, "Promise me, Dad, you'll be okay." That promise became Joe's new mission, to keep going, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever lost someone they loved. Though broken, he was not defeated. In the silence of his grief, something powerful was rebuilding, a fire that would one day lead him back into the fight for America's soul. The return, a battle for the nation's soul. By 2019, the political landscape of America had changed, deeply divided. Loud and angry, the unity Joe Biden once believed in seemed to be fading fast. But behind the scenes, a familiar whisper was growing stronger. "Joe, we need you back." At first, he resisted. After losing Beau, he had promised himself peace. But as he watched the country tear itself apart, something inside him stirred. He thought of his father's words, of Beau's dying wish, and of all the Americans who still believed in decency. Slowly, the old fire returned. In April 2019, Joe Biden announced his run for president. He didn't promise miracles. He promised to restore the soul of America. His campaign wasn't built on rage or revenge. It was built on empathy, unity, and hope. But the road ahead was brutal. Critics called him too old, too soft, a man of the past. His opponents were younger, sharper, and louder. Yet Biden didn't try to outshout anyone. He spoke calmly. With the conviction of experience, he told America, "We're in a battle for the soul of this nation." Then came the chaos, debates, scandals, media storms, and soon, the global pandemic that changed everything. COVID-19 shook America to its core, claiming lives and jobs at a terrifying pace. People were scared, isolated, and angry. In that darkness, Biden's message of compassion found new light. He ran his campaign not from grand rallies, but from his home in Delaware, speaking directly to people through screens, offering comfort when the world needed it most. His sincerity became his strength. He wasn't the loudest voice, but he was the steady one. In the 2020 election, the stakes were higher than ever. It wasn't just about politics. It was about the future of democracy itself. And when the votes were counted, Joe Biden, the boy from Scranton, the father who had buried his own, the man who never stopped getting back up, had done it. He was elected the 46th President of the United States. But for Joe Biden, victory wasn't a moment of triumph. It was a moment of purpose, a chance to heal a wounded nation. The storm of leadership, trials in the White House. When Joe Biden took the oath of office on January 20th, 2021, America was at its most fragile point in decades. The Capitol riot had shaken the nation's faith in democracy. The pandemic was raging, and the economy was bleeding. Standing on that cold January morning, Biden didn't celebrate. He shouldered a storm. His inaugural words were calm yet powerful. "This is our historic moment of crisis and challenge. Unity is the path forward." But unity, he soon discovered, was easier promised than achieved. The country was deeply divided, politically, racially, and emotionally. Every decision he made would be judged by a nation split in half. The first test came immediately, handling the COVID-19 pandemic. Biden moved fast, rolling out vaccines, reopening the economy, and trying to restore normal life. His empathy-driven leadership style returned to the forefront. He consoled grieving families and honored frontline workers as heroes. For him, this wasn't just governance, it was healing. Yet, the presidency brought battles on every front: rising inflation, global conflicts, and political opposition that refused compromise. Critics labeled his decisions too slow, too cautious, too old-fashioned. But Biden stood firm, believing that progress, not perfection, was the real victory. He rejoined the Paris Climate Agreement, strengthened ties with NATO, and pushed for historic infrastructure investments to rebuild America's backbone, jobs, roads, and communities. Each policy reflected a simple principle he had lived by all his life: leave things better than you found them. But leadership also came with loneliness. Every night, as lights dimmed in the White House, Joe would look out at Washington and remember how far he had come. From the train rides of Delaware to the most powerful office in the world, he knew his presidency wasn't about rewriting history. It was about repairing it, about proving that empathy could still lead, that decency could still win. Joe Biden had faced storms all his life: loss, failure, heartbreak, and every time he had risen. Now, he was facing the biggest one yet, leading a divided nation toward hope. And despite the noise, despite the doubt, he stood tall, calm in the storm he was born to face. Global challenges and the weight of the world. Being President of the United States isn't just about leading a country. It's about carrying the weight of the entire world. And for Joe Biden, that weight grew heavier with every passing year. From the moment he entered the Oval Office, crises began to collide, each demanding impossible decisions. The withdrawal from Afghanistan tested his leadership like never before. After 2 decades of war, America was finally coming home. But the chaos that unfolded, desperate crowds at Kabul airport, the tragic loss of soldiers, left Biden facing fierce criticism. For him, it wasn't just a political cost. It was a human one. He had met the families of the fallen. He had seen the pain up close. Yet, even amid backlash, Biden stood by his belief. There was never a good time to end a war. His decisions were guided not by popularity, but by perspective, by years of watching young men and women pay the ultimate price. Then came Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The world watched as democracy itself was threatened. Biden rallied America's allies, uniting NATO in ways not seen in decades. He imposed sanctions, armed Ukraine, and declared, "Freedom will always triumph over tyranny." His experience on the global stage became America's anchor in uncertain times. But challenges didn't stop at borders. At home, inflation soared, immigration debates ignited, and political division deepened. Biden faced fire from both sides, critics calling him too slow, too cautious, too old. Yet, behind closed doors, he kept working, quietly negotiating, rebuilding alliances, restoring America's credibility abroad. He knew he couldn't please everyone, but pleasing everyone was never his mission. His goal was to steady the ship, to guide the nation through turbulence with patience and conviction. And through it all, he never lost his humanity. Whether meeting hurricane victims, consoling parents after shootings, or visiting war zones, Joe Biden's empathy, the very trait that defined his life, remained his compass. The weight of the world was immense, but he carried it the same way he carried his grief, with dignity, with endurance, and with hope. Because for Joe Biden, leadership wasn't about being perfect. It was about showing up when the world needed you most. Legacy of a survivor, the soul of a president. Joe Biden's journey has never been about power. It's been about purpose. From the narrow streets of Scranton to the grand halls of the White House, every chapter of his life has carried the same heartbeat: resilience. He has lived through tragedy, faced defeat, and risen from ashes more than once. But every time, he chose compassion over anger, unity over division, and humanity over politics. As president, Biden's legacy isn't written in the language of victories or polls. It's written in quiet moments of courage. The moment he hugged a grieving mother who lost her child to gun violence. The moment he stood with soldiers returning home from wars he had spent decades trying to end. The moment he said, "I know loss, I know what it's like to feel like you can't go on, but you can. Those words didn't come from a script. They came from scars, from nights spent beside hospital beds, from funerals, from heartbreaks that shaped the man behind the politician. Joe Biden's presidency became less about changing the world overnight and more about reminding people that decency still mattered, that empathy still had power, and that America's strength wasn't in its might, but in its heart. He may not be the loudest or the flashiest leader, but when history looks back, it will see a man who endured, who kept walking when others would have stopped. A leader who believed that unity isn't weakness and kindness isn't naive. Because for Joe Biden, survival was never just about staying alive. It was about staying human. And perhaps that is his greatest lesson to a divided world. That leadership is not about being untouchable. It's about being real. Through every storm, every loss, and every doubt, Joe Biden remained the same man his father raised, the one who keeps getting up. So when the story of America's modern age is told, Joe Biden's name will echo, not as a perfect man, but as a persistent one. A man who stumbled, fell, and rose again, not once, but countless times. From Scranton's boy to America's president, his journey stands as proof that in life, it's not how many times you fall that defines you. It's how many times you get back up